We're in a series now that we're calling All I Need is a Miracle. And I bet some of you probably feel that in one way or another. Maybe there's a circumstance in your life where you feel like you really need God to do something. And maybe the word miracle doesn't seem maybe that miraculous, but to you, there's something you want to see God do. And so for you, it is a miracle. And so what we're going to do over the next really 7 weeks or so is we're going to look at the miracles in John's gospel. And if you've ever read the Gospel of John, there are 7 miracles or signs that John uses to frame his gospel. And really, he picks these intentionally for us so that we can know Jesus better. And he gives a little bit of his purpose, actually, at the end of his book. Let me read this to you. This is in John chapter 20, verses 30 and 31. Talking about the purpose of the miracles that John chose. So now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing in him, you may have life in his name. Now, what this is showing us the reason John picks the miracles that he picked. So, he's saying, yeah, Jesus did a lot more than what I wrote down, but I picked these with a purpose because these miracles will help you know him better. And so last week we looked at the miracle of the marriage at Canaan where Jesus takes water and he turns it to wine. He picked that one intentionally for a reason, and the one we're going to look at this week is one that he also picks intentionally for a reason. And as we look at these miracles, I want us to just give 2 assumptions that we're making as we approach them, which are really important. And the first one is this, it's really important that we realize as we put ourselves in the shoes of the people who would have experienced what we're about to read about, that for them to experience what we're about to read would have been just as shocking as us experiencing it today. Sometimes what we do is we think, oh, well, yeah, that was a long time ago. People were used to miracles. No, it would have hit them like it would hit us. That there's a reason why there were crowds following Jesus, and it was because he was doing these types of things. And let's just be honest, doing these types of things tends to draw a crowd. And so that's one of the assumptions that we bring. And the other assumption that I want us to bring to this text as well, that is very important, is that as we teach these things, that we're not teaching them as a fable or as a story that didn't happen, just where we're learning a lesson from the story that didn't happen. Rather, what we're doing is we're teaching these miracles as history. That it is our belief that the things that we read are things that actually happened. That we believe that there actually was a wedding at Cana that ran out of wine and Jesus provided. We believe that actually happened. And it's really important that we say that and that we realize that, because part of our approach to this series is we're saying, well, if Jesus can do this, then shouldn't you be able to trust him with whatever it is you're facing? And if Jesus didn't actually do that, then it seems hard that you would be able to trust him with what you're facing. I like the way that C.S. Lewis actually talks about the Gospels, because he's someone who has studied a lot of different types of literature. And really what he draws our attention to, and I want to read this quote from him, what he's saying in essence is he's saying that this is either written as history or it's something completely crazier than that. And let me read this to you. This is a quote from C.S. Lewis. He says this. He says, "I've been reading legends and myths all my life. I know what they're like. And I know that none of them are like this. Of this gospel text, there are only 2 possible views. This is either reportage or else some unknown ancient writer without known predecessors or successors suddenly anticipated the whole of modern novelistic, realistic narrative." He's saying that no one wrote fable, that no one wrote mystery like this when this was written. And so for Jesus, or for John to write the way that he did, clearly he wrote it in a way where he's saying, hey, this really happened. And so the text that we're going to look at this morning is one that if you're a parent, you can relate to if you've ever had a sick child. And I mean like a sick child. I don't know if you've ever had a moment where with your kid, they got sick and you felt this enormous pressure that was unlike anything that you've ever felt before. And maybe even fear in your depths that you didn't even know was there. My son Jack, when he was 18 months old, he battled croup. And one evening when he was 18 months old, he particularly had this really, honestly, just really like intense battle with croup. And so we did what his doctor told us to do, which is, you go in the bathroom, turn on the shower, you get it really steamy in there, and the thought is that what the steam will do is it'll break up whatever's causing it, and they'll be okay. And so we did that. We got really hot in the bathroom, and we all went in there, and really after, 30, 40 minutes, we're like, it wasn't getting better. And so we're like, okay, well, we've got to do something. And so I'm like, well, we got one of those nurses on call in our doctor's office, so I make a $150 phone call to call her and say, hey, he's got croup, he's breathing really tight. We've been in the bathroom for this amount of time. Like, what do you think we should do? And she's like, well, hey, get the phone and just put it up to him and let me listen to him breathe. And so for about a minute, I have the phone up there, and she's listening to my son breathe. And I'll never forget the tone in her voice when I picked the phone back up. And she said, you need to immediately take him to the emergency room. And it's like, that hits you like a ton of bricks. And so then we're that's not the report that you want. That's really scary. And so then we get in the car, and I remember we're driving on Campbell. It's the winter, so like it's dark, and it's like 6:30. We're driving through Campbell, and I remember just every time that Jack would struggle to breathe, Joanna would look at me with tears in her eyes, and we wouldn't know what to do. And I would just look at her, and I would say, it's going to be okay. And I didn't know if it would or not, but I think that's what you're supposed to say. And then we get to the place where he goes to the hospital, and we end up staying the night in the hospital, and he ends up being okay. But if you've ever had a sick child, she could have told me on the phone, you need to figure out a way to get him to the moon. I would have figured out a way to get him to the moon. Because when your kid is sick like that, you will do whatever you can to make sure that they are well. And the text that we're looking at this morning is the story of a parent who has a sick son. And he goes to Jesus as kind of a last resort to make his sick child well. And so we're going to look at the story this morning. It's in John's Gospel, chapter 4. And we'll start in verse 46. And we're just going to go through the story a few verses at a time, so we won't get to the end until the end. Chapter 4, verse 46. It says, so he came again to Cana at Galilee, where he had made the water wine. And at Capernaum, there was an official whose son was ill. And when this man heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. Verse 48, so Jesus said to him, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. The official said to him again, sir, come down before my child dies. So I want to look at three aspects of this story. And as we look at these different aspects of this story, we're going to see why this is one of the miracles that John picked. The first aspect I want to look at is I want to look at the challenge. Okay, this is the challenge of the text. This is why it's here. This is why John picks it. And you actually see the reason why in verse 48. She'll put it back up there. It's this line. Like, this line is the key. And it's that unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. The reason why John puts this in here is because what he wants us all to do is he wants us to evaluate our motives for coming to Jesus. that a really good question for you to ask yourself regularly, especially as it pertains to your relationship with Jesus, is, why am I here? Why is it that I do these things that I do? That here in this story, what Jesus is drawing to attention with this man, and he's not just speaking to this man, he's speaking to the crowd that's watching this man beg for his son, and he's speaking to us. And what he's drawing attention to is that there are people who they come to Jesus with no desire of knowing him. They just want him to do stuff for them. That's why they come. And so really, let me ask you, why are you here? Why do you do the things that you do? And I see it come out in conversations with people a lot. I'll talk to people and they'll say, I've just hit a real rough patch, and so I just figure if I started coming to church again, that God's going to start making my life a little bit better. I mean, it doesn't work like that. I hear people say this with giving. They'll be like, I know that giving is something that I'm supposed to do, and I've kind of hit a tight spot, and so my way of trying to get my financial miracle is I'm going to start giving, because once I start doing that, God's going to owe me. And it doesn't work like that. Even with some of the things like with your personal devotion times, and I'm guilty of this, where it's like, man, it just seems like the ball hasn't been bouncing my way. Maybe if I just pray a little bit more, it'll start bouncing my way. Or maybe if I just read a little bit more, that things are gonna just start working out for me. And frankly, what Jesus wants us to see in the text is that's not how it works. That the reason why Jesus says this is because he wants us to understand that we cannot hold his arm behind his back and make him do anything. That he's beyond, and he determines, and what he wants us to see is he wants us to see that having a relationship with him is far more beautiful than him doing for us the things that we want him to do for us. And so this is why Jesus responds the way that he does. This is why Jesus looks at him, because he doesn't want him just to see him as a miracle worker. Instead, he wants him to realize there's so much more to him than him just doing the things that he wants. And some of you, as we talk about, hey, all I need is a miracle. Hey, I'd really like to see God move in this situation. Hey, I'd really like to see it. And maybe you're frustrated because, well, God hasn't done for you what you think he owes you. And to that, Jesus' brother, he wrote a letter in our New Testament. His name was James. And he wrote this in the 4th chapter of his letter. Let me read this to you. James chapter 4, verse 3. And he says this. He says, you ask and you don't receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. So we have to ask ourselves, why do we ask? What is it? What's the point? What are we trying to gain from this? And what Jesus or what John wants us to see is he wants us to see there's so much more to God than him just giving you what you want. And that's why this is here. But if we really think about it too, though, it's interesting. Going back to the desperation this man must have felt for his kid's life. He comes to Jesus, and the idea there where it says asked, in the original language, it's probably better translated, he pleaded, that he continued to ask. That the picture that John's painting is one of a guy who every time Jesus catches his breath, he pops up, he's like, hey, heal my son. That over and over again, and he's desperate. Like his son is on death's door, and Jesus' response to him, is you just want to see a miracle. I mean, look at his response. It seems, he says, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. This man wants his son to be healed. And in this moment, at verse 48, he doesn't get a healing, he gets a rebuke. Seems very insensitive. You almost are like, man, Jesus, could you like giving him a hug? Like you wonder, like, what is it? And the reason why, it's because Jesus wants the man to see that he's more than a miracle worker. He wants him to see that there's more to him than just doing what he wants him to do. And that's the challenge. That's why, for all of us, we have to keep coming back to that question. Why do we pray? Why do we do? Because there's more to it than that. So that's the challenge that we see. But the cool thing is you consider the text, you see next up, you see the example that this man sets. So he's confronted with a very interesting response to, hey, my son's sick. But then his response, in the way this man responds, he gives us an example that we all can follow. Look at this here. He says, the official said to him, sir, come down before my child dies. So this is after the rebuke. He's like, I'm not going to stop, because if your kid's sick, you don't. And then Jesus said to him, go, your son will live. The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him, and he went on his way. Now, the example that we are to follow that this man says is that he believed Jesus before he saw the fruit. That Jesus says, your son's going to be healed. And the man trusted Jesus' word that he was going to be healed. And that's what faith looks like. What we also see is a little bit of like a sidebar. We see this other aspect that I think is really important for us to realize, and it's that Jesus can't be micromanaged. I mean, you have this guy saying, hey, Jesus, this is how I want you to heal my son. I want you to come to Cana. I got a horse. We'll hop on it. We'll get there. It'll be about 3 hours. And then I want you to touch my son, and then he's going to be healed. And Jesus is like, I don't have to do that. I'll just say the word, and he's fine. But isn't that how some of us pray, right? Like, we know what we want God to do, and so we tell him how he needs to do it. Like, hey, Jesus, I'd really want, but if you just do it this way, that would be great. And what we see here in the text is that his ways are so far beyond our ways, and we have no authority to tell him what to do. But still, this man shows us an incredible example of what it looks like to have faith. That what it looks like to trust Jesus even when we don't see or know what's going on. I like the way that the author of Hebrews talks about faith, and it shows us really what this man is talking about here. It says in Hebrews 11, verse 1, it says, faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. That this is how we are to live. And so kind of going back to that idea of like, okay, all I need is a miracle, or maybe it's not, the things that you want to see God do in your life, maybe you wouldn't be so dramatic as to call it a miracle. Well, if you're wanting to see God move in your life, I mean, ultimately, in one way or another, you're going to have some faith, right? And because what faith does is it looks at circumstances that are beyond our control, and it trusts God that one of two things is going to happen. Faith looks at the circumstance that you want to see different, and it believes, possibly, that what God's going to do is on this side of heaven, he's going to respond. That he's going to take the situation and he's going to make it obviously better, and you're going to be able to see it, and he's going to answer your prayer. Like that is faith, right? But even when that happens, okay, you have to have faith on the other side of that miracle too. Because I'm sure that all of us have had circumstances in our life where we prayed that God would do something. We prayed that he would show up. Maybe it didn't happen exactly in the way that we thought it would. And so maybe even instead of giving God the credit that he was deserved, we just came up with all the reasons why maybe it wasn't God. But faith looks at those circumstances that he orchestrated in his own way and says, you know what? I'm going to trust that it was God who did that thing, even though maybe it wasn't the way that I would have thought. And so if you have faith, like you're believing that he is going to actually do that. But the other aspect of faith, and it's one that we don't like to talk about, is that we believe that if it isn't on this side of heaven where Jesus makes it right, faith believes that eventually he still will. That it might not be in this life, it might be in the next. And what faith does is it holds on to the belief of something that we don't see, but it's that these things that we've prayed for, these things that we want to see God do, will inevitably be made right, whether it's in this life or in the next. I like the way that Tim Keller talks about heaven, and he says it this way. He says, in heaven, God will make every sad thing become untrue. That what faith says is faith says, I believe that. Faith says, okay, I cannot understand what is happening in this circumstance that I'm facing right now. But I know there's a God in heaven who will take this sad thing and he'll make it untrue. And the example that we see is one that says, even when I don't understand, even when it's not going the way that I want, even when there's no end in sight, I'm going to continue to love him anyways. I'm going to continue to love him as if he was giving me everything that I wanted, because I trust him enough to know that he ultimately knows what's best for me. That this is what faith does. And the hard thing about this example, but the reason Jesus is here, like the reason why this miracle is here, because all of us, we live on this side of heaven kind of like that man after Jesus gives him the word. There are things we see God do, but ultimately our greatest hope is something that's unseen, and that's heaven, and none of us have experienced that. And John, he says this at the end of his gospel. Look at this in John chapter 20. He says, blessed are those who have not seen and have yet believed. Like, who is that talking about? That's talking about us. That if we can do this, we are blessed. And so what he's pointing us to, what this miracle is trying to draw out of us, is an ability to trust God with our lives. It's trying to draw out of us an ability to say, God, I trust that you know what's better than me. I trust that you do the things that you do with purpose. I trust that even when things don't always make sense, that you're going to see me through. I think of an example of that, and I don't know if any of you guys during quarantine became like a Michael Jordan fan because of that documentary, The Last Dance. I did. And I remember watching it. I think it's something so interesting about Michael Jordan. He's arguably one of the greatest players in the world, except for LeBron James, who's significantly better because he's more athletic and a better passer, but that's not important. But he's sitting there. He's incredible. Like, the whole thing is like, man, this guy, like, and if you think of the first part of his career, like, his story was, we all forget this because, like, it's been forever since he played, but the first part of his career, the story about Michael Jordan was he's the best guy to never win. Like, and they get into that. Like, he's this incredible player, scores 35 points a game, like, but he can't get past the Pistons, like, and there are stories that were written before they won that's like, man, I don't think Jordan's ever going to win. But then if you look at his championships, what happened that made him start winning? It was when he started trusting his teammates. Their first championship, why did they win? because a guy named John Paxton. Because Phil Jackson looks over at Jordan on the bench and he's like, who's open? He's like, Pax. And then Phil Jackson's like, give him the ball. He trusts him to take the shot. He takes the shot and he makes it. And then if you look at their fifth title, different guy, kind of looks the same, but his name's Steve Kerr. And they won Game 6 against the Jazz because Stockton came off of Kerr. Kerr was open and he hit the jumper. That happened because Jordan trusted his teammates to take the shot. And as you think about your life, some of you are holding on to the ball. When God's like, trust me to take the shot. And it's kind of like Jordan, where how did he do when he trusted himself? Well, he just getting close but never winning. How does your life go when you don't trust him, but you just kind of rely on yourself? How has that gone for you in the past? That there comes a point where we have to let go and we have to trust that he knows better than we do. That's what this text is bringing us to a place where we can say, well, if that's what it says, I'm going to trust him. Well, if that's what he wants for me, I'm going to trust him, I'm going to do it, and I don't really care what I'm going to do it. That's the example that we see from this man, and that's the example that we are to emulate. But then the final element of the story that we see is we see the fruit. That this isn't just a story about a guy, but there are aspects of his character that we see later on as this story ends that are aspects that really we would want in our lives. Look at this. Verse 51. It says, as he was going down, his servants met him and told him that his son was recovering. So he asked them the hour when it began to get better, and they said to him, yesterday, at the 7th hour, the fever left him. And the father knew that was the hour when Jesus said to him, your son will live. And he himself believed in all of his household. Now this was the second sign that Jesus did when he had come from Judea to Galilee. Now, this is a picture of the fruit of faith. This is why it's not just, for the sake of your soul that you should trust Jesus like this, but honestly, Jesus said that he'd come that you might have life and have it to the fullest. This is some of that life to the fullest, and here's how you see it. It's a very interesting word on the screen. It's that word, yesterday. Okay, think about it. Here you have a man who is desperate for the health of his child. Essentially coming to Jesus, throwing a Hail Mary pass, saying, this is my last shot, I'm going to just give this a try. And then Jesus speaks the word. Okay, if you're in his situation, what do? Well, you get on your horse, you go home, and you see if Jesus' word came true, right? Like, you're a desperate parent. Like, this is what you do in that circumstance. That word's yesterday. So Jesus spoke to the man. And he's like, all right, I trust him. And he stays in town. Presumably to run some errands, maybe. Maybe he had some business that he needed to take care of. And so he just stays. It's interesting, too, as you consider the text. Notice he doesn't ask about his son. But they just bring it up to him when they see him coming on the road. That this is the fruit of faith. Because this is showing us how much he trusted Jesus' word. He trusted Jesus' word so much that he's like, well, if he said it, it must be good. I'm going to go ahead and finish this up. And then almost as an aside, he's like, hey, what time did the fever leave? Well, right at the time that Jesus said that it would. And this is what people of faith have. Is they have this quiet confidence that they get to carry during life's most challenging circumstances. That they have a trust that is so beyond them that when other people are spinning their wheels, going crazy, they're able to be grounded because they know the one who ultimately is in control. This is the value of trusting Jesus' word. Because I can tell you that in your life, there are going to be things that are going to come your way. There are going to be proverbial storms. There are going to be things that frustrate you. There are going to be all kinds of circumstances where you're not going to know what to do. But the beauty of the gospel is that you have one who will walk with you through those circumstances. And when you know that he's there, there's something about that where you realize that he's all you need. That this is the fruit of trust. This is why we trust him. But then you also see another example of just the fruit. And this is how you can kind of know that for the man who is approaching Jesus about his son, that it's not really about the miracle anymore. It's not just about the miracle. And it's because it says there that his whole household believed. That Jesus did something so significant that he made sure that everyone in his household believed in the one who did it. And part of the fruit of the faith is that we look at our lives and we consider the things that Jesus has done inside of us. And we say, who is it that God has put in our lives that need to experience these things that I have experienced? Like what this text should do is it should cause us, one, to consider, has Jesus ever done anything so significant inside of me that I would want to bring people along for the journey? And then if he has, it's evaluating the people who are in the room with us and saying, okay, how can I be used to help them? So for some of you, that might mean that, okay, like there are people in your life that God wants you to bring here. For some of you, there are people in your life that God wants you to have conversations with that maybe are hard for you to have, but your responsibility is so that you might help people know him better. But this is one of the reasons why we're doing that class on Wednesday night on the reason for God. Because we want to help you be equipped to have those conversations with people. But for some of you watching online, maybe there are people in your life who you could easily share this content with, who you could easily invite to watch with you. You create a little watch party on Facebook, or you could share a link on YouTube. But God does things inside of us. It's never just for us. It's for those around us too. And so it forces us to ask the question. But as I close this morning, I just want to go back to John 20. And I just want to read this again as we kind of ponder this as we go. John says, this was written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. That the purpose of this text is to bring us closer to Jesus. The purpose of this text is to look at that comment that Jesus made to this man, which on the surface might even seem a little insensitive. But it's to force us to ask the question, why do you love him? Why do you care? Why is he a priority for you? And if it's anything other than wanting to know him better, if it's anything more than a relationship that he wants to have with you, then you're missing it. And I would say that Jesus wants the same thing from you that you would want with other people, which is just to love you, just to love you. I think of it this way with my kids, that if I take them to the store and I buy them something, my kids are pretty good kids, so they're probably going to look at me and they're going to tell me they love me. Okay? I know in that moment, them telling me they love me has nothing to do with the fact they love me. It has everything to do with I gave them something they wanted. But if I come home after a long day with nothing for them, and they come up to me and they look at me in the face and they say, Dad, I missed you. I love you. That feels different. Like that feels genuine. That's better. And what Jesus is trying to draw our attention to, he's saying, hey, love me like that. Not because of what I can do. Love me because you love me. Now, the beautiful thing of the text is that Jesus not only challenges his faith and gives him eternal life, he also heals his son. And that oftentimes that's what you're going to find. But sometimes you're not. And that's okay because we have faith that he'll eventually make it right.